But today I will be filming my experience being a flight attendant. Yee! I literally have no idea how to begin this video. Let's start at the beginning. So I was a flight attendant for dun dun dun, the big reveal, Spirit Airlines. So these are my wings. This is my old uniform sweater, which I've still kept. I threw everything else away the minute I left Spirit. More on that later. But these are my wings, and they're very scratched up and gross looking, and I don't know why. So that's what, my hands are so dry. So that's what my wings look like, and they're very, very scratched up and weird looking, and that didn't happen on the job. That happened after I quit. So strange. But anyway, are my Spirit wings. So yeah, I was a flight attendant for Spirit Airlines for 9 months. 9 months. Ugh, feels like forever. But this was in 2013. So the end of 2012, no, the end of 2013, beginning of 2014 was when I was a flight attendant for Spirit. I applied to be a flight attendant for Spirit because of my family. Which sounds like a good reason, but it's kind of terrible. My mom kind of wanted me to travel and get out of my shell more, and she wanted free flight benefits. What can I say? So I agreed. I applied. They don't have a base in New York, first of all. They're based out of Fort Lauderdale. Spirit Airlines, if you haven't heard of it, look it up. I'm sure there's tons of information that'll orient you with the airline that I just don't have to share. You could just Google it on your own. Yeah, so I worked for them, and they're based out of Fort Lauderdale, and they have bases in Atlantic City, New Jersey, Chicago, Illinois. I mean, everyone, I feel, Dallas, Texas, Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm being so weird about the states. Where else? I feel like they have one more. I don't remember, but I think those are the main bases pretty much. Spirit Airlines is a domestic carrier, which means that they don't do international flights necessarily. They only, well, they do have international flights, but you're not flying out to like Europe or Africa, or you're kind of staying in America, so it's mostly United States flights, and you do some like South America and the Caribbean. So they do fly out to like Haiti, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico. Wow, it's been a while. The Bahamas, Mexico, Costa Rica, Colombia, places like that. They don't do Ecuador, I remember that. It's so funny because I had to memorize everywhere we flew, and now it's just like whoosh, gone. Applied for the job because my mom wanted me to, pretty much, and I was like, sure, why not? I was unemployed at the time. I wasn't really doing anything. This was before Sephora. So after Sephora, what? After the flight attendant job was when I worked at Sephora. So before Sephora, I was a flight attendant. It was an online application. They had positions opening at the Dallas base and Chicago, and I was kind of torn because I had this really romanticized version of Texas. I had not visited the state of Texas ever before, and I had this like romantic vision of like horses and cowboys, and totally not what Dallas is about. But anyway, I was like, ooh, I like horses. Maybe I'll be Dallas based. So silly. But my mom was like, oh, maybe Chicago would be better for you because it's a city and you're a city girl, so you'll be used to the trains and like the hectic commute and people and whatnot. Eventually they narrowed it down. They just did a Chicago class, so that's where I ended up being based. I did that online application. I got an invitation back to their open house, which was in Chicago. So if you're applying for a job as a flight attendant and you're applying to different bases, just be aware that some of them, most of them, require you to go to the open house in that particular state. So I did not know that. So I had to book a flight to Chicago for a weekend, and it was a 2-day orientation, like open house. So the first day it was like hundreds of people came in. You got a number, you had to dress up, like it was obviously business professional, even though you're still being like applying for a flight attendant. You gotta dress nicely. Some people didn't and they still got the job, but that's just like my own personal thing. And a lot of people recommended that you try to look as much as a flight attendant as possible. So if you're able to, and if you're interested in being a flight attendant, look up like the dress code or what the colors are for the company and wear those particular colors at the interview, and try to have like nice makeup on if you're a female. Try to look neat in appearance if you're a male. Yeah, and then that'll like put in their minds pretty much, like, oh, they already know the colors, they're dressed the part, I can see them working for this company since they already kind of look like they do. Just a little tip. Into the first open house, and it was just like a very long interview process where you just chatted with people, a lot of icebreakers. You had to go up to the front and say your most embarrassing moment or something like that, and so funny. It was really fun, which was the main thing, and it's a lot of people persons, so a lot of chatting going on. It was really cool. I remember it being pretty long. It was like a 5-hour ordeal, and then if you were invited for the next day, obviously it was a good sign. So at the end of the day, they told you, they're like, okay, they sent you an email, I believe, they told you in person. It was a while ago, and they told you, okay, we were interested in seeing you for the second interview. And then obviously they saw me for the second interview, and it was like a longer process, and you were broken up into little groups. And I remember at one point you had to read an announcement as if you were the flight attendant, and it was such a weird feeling because you're sitting at the table and you're just like, we'll be landing in the Bahamas shortly, and it was just very, very funny. And then you got a one-on-one interview with a particular person that was hiring, a hiring coach, and they ask you questions like, what's your best flight? What's your worst experience with the airline? What else did they ask you? What would you do in case of this emergency? Or are you able to like move to different places? What's your flexibility? So yeah, that was cool. Aced that because I love like one-on-one interactions. I'm so much better one-on-one than in a group for some reason. So I love one-on-one interviews. After that, I got offered the job. Once they finish that one-on-one interview, you have to fill out paperwork right away. You have to give them your passport, your social security, like you give them all your information. It's like the new hire paperwork. You fill out right there, and you take your picture for your ID, your flight attendant ID, which I don't have. I had to give it back when I left. Very fast, like 2 days, like a very quick process, and it was pretty lonely because I was there by myself, so I had like dinner alone, and I'm used to it pretty much because I'm only child and I'm very independent. I do a lot of things by myself, but it was so strange being in like a new city. So that was like a taste of what the flight attendant life was gonna be like. So I was hired at the end of November, sorry. It was the end of November, beginning of December, and then they have training. So a flight attendant training happens usually where the airline is based. So I know American Airlines was based in Dallas, Texas, so their training was in Texas. Spirit Airlines is based in Fort Lauderdale, so our training was in Florida. Excuse me. And it was a month-long training. Not all airlines are like that. Some airlines are almost 2 months, 6 weeks. Spirit was pretty fast. It was only 4 weeks of training. But that's something I didn't know going into the job. I had no idea. For some reason, I didn't look it up, I didn't research. I was just like on a whim, like, hey, let me try this, why not? So I had to travel to Fort Lauderdale Christmas Day, I think it was. Yeah, it was Christmas Day at night. So I'm Latin, like my mom is from the Dominican Republic, my dad is Guyanese, celebrate with my mom. Christmas, thankfully, New Year's Eve, we wait until midnight. So technically it's the 25th, but it's midnight on New Year's Eve. We get together on the 24th and we wait until midnight, and that's when we open presents. So it didn't really affect my time with my family. So I traveled all the way over there. I had to bring specific items, like for training, it had to be a white collared shirts. It had to white or red collared shirts, black pants, at all times, no jeans. You had to wear heels or bring a pair of heels. You didn't have to wear them every time, which I learned later on, but you had to bring a pair of heels. You had to bring a belt if you had belt loops in your pants, and if you were out of compliance, they could send you home. Like if you did not have a white shirt with collar, like with a collar, they could potentially send you home. So it was like crazy strict. You had to have your hair up at all times if you were a woman. You had to have it either in a ponytail or a bun, and you had to have makeup on. Like you had to have makeup on if you were a woman, which was like such an issue later on in the road. Like I have such makeup problems in general. Like I hate being forced to wear makeup for a job. I like the option of changing it up and not wearing makeup, but my own personal preference. Coming into being a flight attendant, I didn't know there was such a stress on your appearance. You had to have base, foundation, powder. You had to have a blush or bronzer, eyeshadow or eyeliner, mascara. You had to have these items on, and if you did not have your makeup on, for example, and you came in for a flight, you're out of compliance and you could be written up and get in trouble for it. Struggle, man. The struggle of being a woman in America, I swear. Whatever. So I went to training for a month. It was very hectic, very grueling. The days, I forgot the time, but it was like 9 a.m. I believe, or 8 a.m. till 5. They were packed full of information. You had to learn everything about the aircrafts that we were flying. Obviously, you had to learn emergency routes, emergency procedures. You had to learn, we did not learn, like it's funny, people think flight attendant training, like are they showing you how to serve peanuts? No, they're showing you how to save you in case the plane goes down in water, in a forest, in the desert. Survival training happening that they literally don't have time to show you how to serve soda or peanuts. Like, you learn that on the job, literally. Everything else is just pretty much where's all the safety equipment on the aircraft? What happens if there's a terrorist that hijacks the plane? Which was one of the scariest things I had to learn, because pretty much it's like you have to, I don't even want to go into it, but yeah, they teach you how to deal with all these situations, and it's quite scary. It's very frightening. As a passenger, you don't really think about all that, but if you're a flight attendant, obviously on a flight, you have to be aware about these things. Situational awareness was a very big thing that they taught you over there. You had to learn how to swim. So there was this drill we had to do for a whole day where we went out and we inflated a raft in a pool. We kind of swam up into the pool and we went over safety procedures if we're in the water. Crazy stuff. I think somebody asked like, oh, if there are dead passengers, what should we do with their bodies? And I'm just like, oh my God, help, Jesus. It was a very, very cool experience, and I would not trade it for the world, even though I was pretty miserable the entire time. It was very hard being away from home. It was my first time being away from home. I'm a huge homebody and I love my family so much, so that was kind of difficult for a whole month to be away from them, especially during the holidays, to spend New Year's with a group of strangers that I had just met 4 days ago. And it was so strange for me. It was a very different experience. There are other things, like I had roommate drama, but that doesn't really help in the video. What else? You had to learn CPR. You have to learn how to save someone from the water. You have to learn how to deal with a choking victim or someone that just passes out. You have to learn how to administer aid, like a portable oxygen bottle that's always on board, how to kind of administer that. So your flight attendants are pretty badass. Like, they're equipped with like a little bit of knowledge on everything on that aircraft. They're simply not there to look pretty and hand out peanuts. They're there once shit goes down. Like, they are your go-to. They can handle the situation, hopefully, if they paid attention training. But training is pretty hard. Spirit actually has very high standards for their flight attendants. I think most airlines, from what they said, most airlines accept 70 as passing or 75, and Spirit expected you to have a 90 on these tests, and they're administered by Federal Aviation, so you have to be on top of your game. Training was so stressful, so stressful. There's so much information being thrown at you, and it's such a short amount of time that you have to learn it, that literally being in Florida didn't matter if we were in Alaska, because we would go to training like from 9 a.m. to 5, and right after you'd have to study and do your homework for the next day. So you would spend hours just studying and cramming, and it was very, very stressful, because if you fail 2 tests, you get sent home. And there's a test like almost every day, pretty much. So yeah, if you're late 15 minutes, you would get sent home. If you're late for 5 minutes, you would get sent home. Somebody got sent home because they were late 15 minutes. They overslept. One of like my good friends at the time during the training, he overslept like 15 minutes. He took a cab to training, was crying, bawling, and they sent him home. Ridiculous, which I guess makes sense because you don't want to be late for a flight, and it's kind of indicative of like how you would be, but it's 15 minutes, come on. And if you failed the final test, you can get sent home. People actually failed the final, like they made it so far. They made it 4 weeks in, they did all the procedures, they did all the training, they sacrificed, they were there. Like, Spirit isn't paying you to be there, by the way. You're not paid for training until you pass training. So if at any point in time you fail the training, you get sent home, and you just wasted your time and money and effort and your flight to Florida and living expenses over there, because they put you up in a hotel, but they don't give you lunch or dinner. It does provide breakfast, but lunch and dinner, you're pretty much on your own. You have to pay for it yourself out of pocket. So it gets pretty pricey after 4 weeks in a different state that's not your home state. It was heartbreaking. The last day, I think 9 people got sent home, or 7, like a point or something, and they got sent home. And instructors were crying, students were crying, people that passed were crying. Like, it was just so intense. I remember just being so over it by the time it was done. I was just like, I can't wait to get out of here. I just want to go home. This has been the most stressful month of my life, just cramming and studying, but finally became a flight attendant and I earned my wings. I passed with a pretty decent grade. I was so shocked. I was like, oh my God, because the night before I was cramming until like 3 a.m. So I got very little sleep, but it was worth it because I got my wings. And after that, you were sent home for like a few days. I think you were sent home for like 4 to 5 days, and then you had to move to your base. So we all had to move to Chicago. I made one really good friend. Her sister was already a flight attendant for Spirit, and we moved into her crash pad, but more on that later. So I got to go home for like 4 to 5 days, and I'm just like, am I really doing this? Am I really picking up my entire life to move to Chicago? Because if you are based in a different location, you have to live there. Like, if you're Chicago based, you have to live in Chicago. If you're Dallas based, you have to live in Dallas, etc. Same thing with everything else. And move to this new state where I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any family. I didn't have any friends. Now that I think back on it, I was pretty like intense. Like, I'm insane for doing that. But I was like, you know, only live once. Why not? It's an experience. It's something you can look back on, I guess, and cherish. I moved to Chicago. It was the coldest winter in Chicago, and I hated it. I hated Chicago so much because it was so cold and there was like nothing you can do, and the level of sarcasm is like insane. Well, the people I encountered anyway, like it's so much more than you. Like a rough start because it was already very cold. There weren't really many opportunity to meet new people, and I was just homesick and miserable. And also, like, the place where I moved to is a crash pad. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term, but a crash pad is literally that, somewhere you can crash for like a night or two and then go off on your flight. And it's very popular amongst flight attendants. So crash pads are normally either apartments or based out of hotels. Mine was based out of a Quality Inn, and that should tell you everything you need to know right there. So yeah, it was only like 130 bucks a month, which is pretty decent. Because again, when you're a flight attendant, you're not getting paid that much, which I had no idea about. It sounds amazing because it was like $18 an hour, but the way you get paid is ridiculous. It's when the minute the plane takes off. So when you're on the ground, if the wheels haven't moved, you're not getting paid. So if you see grumpy flight attendants when a flight is delayed, they're not being paid to just stand there. Like, they're literally not being paid until the plane moves. So that's when the pay starts, and it stops the minute you like land and stop moving. So yeah, when it comes down to it, you're only in the air for like 3 hours, 4 hours a day. Like, that's not much money. And the way Spirit in particular broke down its paychecks, the first check would be a big juicy one because it would include like per diem, and per diem is what you get paid when you're outside of your base. So you get $2 and change per hour when you're away from your base. Pretty sweet. Say you have a long layover and you're sleeping in Vegas and then you're sleeping in New York for the day, and it's like a 4-day trip. That's a lot of money that you're accruing. So yeah, that first paycheck in the beginning of the month would be big and juicy. Then the second one didn't have the per diem, didn't have any of that. It was, one flight attendant referred to it as the welfare check, which is like funny in retrospect, but it was like a $500 check. So you got typically like $1,000 in the beginning of the month and then $500 towards the end. So you're making $1,500 like a month. Let's say that's what I was making, and I wasn't picking up extra trips or anything like that, because if you pick up extra trips you can make more money. So 130, long story short, was perfect for me since I wasn't making like all that much, and I'm really bad at managing my money. But anyway, I had to move to Chicago. I moved to this crash pad. It was in Schiller Park, which, if you don't know Chicago, it's a very desolate, it's very suburban. It's not close to the city at all. And in retrospect, I wish I would have lived somewhere closer to the city or chosen something closer, because I would have enjoyed Chicago a little bit more. That first night, I literally sat, because it's bunk beds, I sat on the top bunk and I was just like, is this life? Is this real life right now? Oh my gosh. And you live with like a bunch of other random flight attendants, pretty much. Different airlines, so they could be from American, or I forget where they were from, Delta, like a bunch of different airlines live together. This particular crash pad, you had to book your bed in advance. So she used this like online system where you don't have a consistent bed. So you're kind of moving around all over the place anyway, and you live out of your suitcase here, even though technically it's your home. And advertised, she said it was a kitchen. There was a hot plate and a fridge. Like, that was her kitchen. So we all shared this little communal area. They didn't have a sink really, so you had to wash dishes in the bathroom sink, which was like a different experience altogether. Honestly, I was really miserable living in the crash pad. Thank God I had Kendall living there with me, and she made things like 100 times better. But it was hard. Wait for crew scheduling, which are the people in charge of scheduling all the flight attendants and the pilots for flights, waiting for them to call and send me somewhere on a trip. That would be like the highlight of my day. But overall, it was pretty miserable. I don't recommend you live in a crash pad if you can help it. Or if you can live in a crash pad, choose an apartment with, it's called, what is it called? Cold beds? Cold beds. So cold beds are your scheduled assigned beds. Like, no one else has those beds. You can get comfortable. Later on, towards the end of my tenure in Chicago, I switched crash pads and I lived in an apartment one, and it was much better. It was like a much nicer experience. I had a cold bed and it was mine, and I can leave stuff on it and not worry about someone else having to sleep there. Another thing about the crash pad is that it would get overbooked sometimes, and people would literally have to sleep on like a big sofa or the floor, and that was just not the wave. You're tired from a trip, like it was just not okay. Now, as far as my time being a flight attendant, my first trip I got sent out to was a 4-day trip. So you can get sent out either to do a turn, and a turn is literally that. You're flying to a location, then you're turning right around and coming back. Some people that live in Chicago prefer that. I'm right back home. For me, Chicago was not my home, so I preferred trips. You can get sent on 2, 3, 4, 5 is like the maximum, and that's like a lot. The longer the trip, the more money you're making. My first trip ever was like second night in Chicago, and I got sent out to Las Vegas. I forgot where else I got sent. Las Vegas and Fort Myers and somewhere else, which I totally forgot, but that was one of the best trips I ever had. It was my first time in Vegas, so I went out with a bunch of flight attendants. We had dinner. It was really cool. I'd never been on this trip before, and I just loved the experience of going there and not having to pay for anything. Like, my first time there was me getting paid to be there, which was pretty cool. Like, that's so sweet. And Fort Myers was gorgeous, so beautiful. It's in Florida, and it's like this amazing beach town. Oh, it's so beautiful. So those are the perks of being a flight attendant. I got to travel across America to a lot of different states that I normally wouldn't have gone to on my own. My favorites were Portland, Oregon. Stay weird. I love the vibe. It was amazing. It was something straight out of the 90s. If you guys ever watch Portlandia, that's such an accurate representation of what Portland's like. I got to go to Powell's Bookstore, Voodoo Donuts, which are like staples over there. So cool. I also went to California several times. I went to LA, but I'd already been there. And LA was nice. I like LA. In-N-Out Burger. So good. To go to the beach there, but my favorite place in California was San Diego. I was there for like almost 24 hours, and I rode a bicycle to the beach by myself, and it was like 2 hours away. So I rode there, I hung out at the beach, and then I just ate some good Mexican food, and I rode back. And on my way back to the airport, I got a flat tire. So I was like, oh my God, what do I do? Not to the airport, sorry, on my way back to the hotel. And I had to be at the airport at a certain time. So I called a cab, and I was like, hey, I have a bicycle with me, and like I have a flat, can you please come here? And I waited half an hour, and the cab never came. They're like, we'll call you back. So I was like, let me start walking towards the hotel and maybe they'll call me back. They never did. So I literally had to walk back, and then towards the end of it, I just hopped on the bike, and it was downhill. I feel so bad about it. So I just messed up that time, but I had to be at the airport. Mall of America. Oh my God, that mall is so gorgeous. Love it. It was so much fun. I got to go to a lot of different cool places, which I totally appreciate. Kansas City, Missouri, I think it was beautiful. It was really a cool city, and I totally had so much love for it. My least favorite places to travel were Detroit, because we were put up in a very isolated hotel, so there wasn't much to do there, unfortunately, and I didn't really venture out into the Motor City, which I think I should go back there and just explore. Where else was kind of like meh? Florida, when we got to go to Fort Lauderdale, I was kind of like over it because I have family in Florida, so I go there a lot anyway, and I would just be so tired. So the first 3 months I was a flight attendant, I was actually sick like every single day. I got so sick because those planes are filthy. They really don't clean them. We don't clean them. Flight attendants aren't responsible to clean the plane. So sorry about that. Cleaners that come on, they don't really love their job, and they're not really going in for a hard clean. So yeah, planes are filthy. I was so sick for the first 3 months. I remember I got a ear infection, sinus infection, and a throat infection all at the same time. Death on wheels, my first 3 months. But all flight attendants say, like, once you get over the first 3 months of like being sick all the time, nothing will bring you down. And that's the case. Like, after those first 3 months, I was fine. My body adjusted. Just a warning. The Spirit doesn't really go anywhere international. I didn't have like fun flights. I think the most dreaded flight we had out of Chicago was a red-eye to Arizona. That was hardcore. If you've ever flown a red-eye, you already know how stressful and tiring that could be. Imagine working during a red-eye. Like, that's insane. So pretty much flight attendants have to get there an hour before the flight is scheduled to depart, from what I remember, and you have to check in. If you don't check in within the window, you have to call crew scheduling and let them know you're on your way, or check in with them over the phone if they approve it. Sometimes they don't, so you gotta be careful. You can get written up if you're late. You have to sign in and you choose which position you're gonna work. We had flight attendants A, B, C, or D, and each position is something different. Flight attendant A is the most coveted position because you get an extra $2 on top of everything else per hour that you're working that position. So people really want it to be that, but you have more responsibility. You're at the front of the plane, you're kind of directing everything. That's pretty much what flight attendant A does. B is in the back, you brief the emergency exit rows, and C is in the back making the announcements. A makes announcements also, but C is doing them while you're coming in, for Spirit anyway. Let's learn how to do the safety demonstration. I totally forgot everything, it's so sad. Cons were the hours, they were crazy. I mean, when you're new, you're on reserve. That's what happened with me. Like, I don't have a set schedule, so it's pretty much whenever they call you until you gain seniority, and then you have a set schedule. So that was pretty rough on my life because they can call you anytime, and they called you 2 hours before your trip. So if your trip leaves at 5 a.m., they call you at 3 a.m. Like, they let you know the window of time that they can call you. There's certain airlines that they can call you 24 hours in that day, but Spirit, like, you had a set block. So let's say your block was like 9 to 5. They could call you anytime between 9 to 5, but once 5 o'clock hit, you didn't have to answer the phone if they called you. We're free pretty much for the rest of the evening until the following day when 9 to 5 started again. So you got to bid on that, on like what your time slot was, and then yeah, that's how you got trips. Pretty much you got a phone call. So it was pretty stressful because you had to be around your phone all the time. You had to be ready at all times to go, and you really couldn't do much with your day if you were scheduled, I mean, from 9 to 5, because what if they call you and you're out like super far into the city and you have to travel back home and get all your stuff ready. So it was a lot of like craziness and getting ready. I left a lot of things in a lot of hotel rooms all over America because such is life. For any aspiring flight attendants, I think it's a very fun job. It's very cool if you are very flexible with your schedule and if you just want to travel and like you're about that lifestyle. I do recommend going with an international airline just because you get layovers in like Italy or England, Paris, South Korea, South Africa, like all these cool places. You get to lay over, and you lay over for like days, not just like a few hours. So that's pretty cool. One of my best experiences working with Spirit where just meeting different people and visiting new locales. It was a lot of fun. The reason I left my job with Spirit was because I had to come home. Pretty much I was on a trip at the airport and we're scheduled to go to Texas right after. So pretty much like the people are there waiting. We're just at the airport waiting for our plane to arrive. And I got a phone call that my mother was in a car accident. So pretty much she was crossing the street and a vehicle struck her. And it was like the worst phone call of my life. I went crazy. Like, I dropped everything. I was just sobbing hysterically, and I got on a plane right back home as soon as possible. Like, I said, I'm sorry, I have to go, I can't. And they ended up having to fly in a flight attendant from New Jersey to Baltimore, where we were, to cover my flight, and it was delayed for like an hour, but because they can't leave. I think it's one flight attendant per 50 people, and that flight was like 170 something people, so you needed like a certain amount of flight attendants. But the flight attendants on my flight understood. They were like, okay, yeah, totally, we get it, go home. And I went home and I went straight to the hospital in my uniform, and it was the worst moment of my life to date because she actually fractured her skull. So there was just like blood everywhere. It was just horrible. But yeah, that's why I left. I left a voicemail to my supervisor, and then after that I pretty much stayed there for the 10 days that she was in the hospital, and then she was discharged and I came back home with her. And we lived with my grandma also, so my grandma came in and she was helping with everything. So my mom wasn't alone when I went back to work because my grandma stayed and was helping her out. But I went back to Chicago and it just wasn't the same being over there because I just knew that my mom was here healing and needed me. I'm an only child, so I'm very close to my mother, and it was rough. I became very responsible, and I would just come home the minute a trip was over and not wait for my time to be like done. So I would just fly home all the time, and I know in retrospect it's irresponsible. I shouldn't have done that, and I should have just stayed in Chicago, but I just couldn't do that. I had to be home. And I got in trouble for that, for lateness, for missing flights. Well, I didn't miss them. Like, I would be called by crew scheduling and I'm just like, oh, I can't, I have a sick day I have to take. And they're like, oh, well, you didn't tell us what time. So they would switch things around. It didn't cause any delays because, again, they tell you 2 hours in advance. So they're able to find someone else for that flight. But still, like, it didn't look good for my record. And yeah, I ended up leaving because I couldn't do it. Like, I just couldn't be in Chicago anymore while this was going on at home. So I left, I packed up all my stuff, and I came back home, and that was it. That was the end of me being a flight attendant. I actually got a month of time off. I forgot what it was called, but you can apply for it and you can get a month off, and I did my month. It was in August, but by the time the end of August came, I was just like, I just don't want to do this anymore. I just can't. I can't live somewhere else in a different state. And I was very, very lucky that I got that phone call in Baltimore and I wasn't like in Vegas or something where it's like 6 or 5 hours away from New York. I would have cried. Well, I did cry. I cried the whole like half-hour flight from Baltimore to New York. It was just very lucky circumstances as far as where I was located, not the accident, obviously. So that brought my flight attendant career to an end. It was 9 months long. I don't regret being a flight attendant, but I really can't do it. It's not for me. Wearing makeup for a red eye, like that was just ridiculous. There's some flight attendants that are very catty. They're very out to get you and you're kind of stuck with them for 4 days. You're stuck with them on a plane. So that's kind of hard. There's some flight attendants that were absolutely wonderful. And if you could fly with them all the time, like I totally would. They're just amazing, really good-hearted people. And that was really cool. I had so many experiences. Like I had people faint on my flights. I had to give them a portable oxygen bottle for them to breathe from. I had a little girl throw up during a flight and like it was awful. We tried to clean up as best we could, but the next person that sat down in her seat was like, why is my seat wet? What is this sticky thing? And I just stared at her. I was like, do you want alcohol? Like, wash your hands right now. Craziness. There were also some pilots that were kind of like pervs, like they would hit on you. I just stayed away from all that. It was not okay. You hear the craziest stories of flight attendants and pilots, and I just would just go to my room and lock the door and call it a day because I'm not about that life. Spirit gets a pretty bad rap, but they're trying. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard to do that, and God bless the gate agents, God bless the flight attendants that do it, because it's such a difficult job. It's not as easy as it looks, and it's pretty intense. You also have to do a yearly recurrent training, so once your basic training is done, they test you every single year in 2 days. Like that whole thing we did in a month in 2 days, just to make sure you know it, you're on top of your game. If you fail it, you have like one other opportunity to take it again. If you fail that, you're done, you're out of a job, like you're fired. Pretty much. So they're pretty strict. They have a lot of standards. If you worked in Chicago, by the way, and if you were based in Chicago and you wanted to go somewhere else, you can do that. I know flight attendants that wanted to be based everywhere. Like they were based in Chicago, Fort Lauderdale, Vegas, Dallas, just because they want to live in different states, and I think that's a pretty cool idea. I had one of my Kendall, my good friend, she did that. She was Chicago based at first, then when I left, she left to Vegas for a while, and then she went to Dallas, which is where she's originally from, so she stayed there. So I think that's a really like cool experience as well if you're into that. Questions in the comments below. What? Leave me comments and questions in the down bar. I'm pretty good at answering them, so just let me know if there's anything I missed or anything that you want to know, because it's very early in the morning and I'm headed to work now. Ugh. So I'm like brain dead. I don't know what else to talk about at all. By the way, I just got back from a trip to Hawaii, so look forward to a vlog. I was actually recording most of it to try to put a vlog together. I don't know how I'm gonna do it yet. I don't know if I'm gonna talk, because I have a few vlogs where I'm talking through, like vacation vlogs, but I think I'd rather just like put the images with music, like the video clips with music, and call it a day, because that just looks better and it's like a nicer vibe. I have a ton of videos that I filmed while I was a flight attendant. Like there's a travel with me to San Diego. That was when I was a flight attendant. I had no voice then, crazy. There's one to Baltimore that I recorded, and there's another like get ready with me or something like that. Anything that's a get ready with me in a different state was when I was a flight attendant, pretty much. So I tried to keep recording. I tried to like keep some vestige of like my own life, but it's just such a scattered, unorganized life when you're on reserve and you don't know what your schedule is in advance. Like you're really at someone's beck and call, and that was like really difficult for me. If you're the type of person that's super flexible and can like just pick up and go, then that's awesome, you can do that. But I was like pretty depressed living over there, to be honest. Like I was pretty depressed living in Chicago. It was beautiful there. I went to Navy Pier, I went out to Damien Street, which I loved, like Soho-ish kind of vibe, so it was pretty dope. But overall, I just need to be near my family. It was just so rough on me, and I'm very, very happy that I came back to New York, even though the circumstances weren't the best at all. But everything happens for a reason. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I look forward to your wonderful, kind comments. I worked extra hard on this wing liner, okay? So I hope it's doing it for you. I look forward to hearing any questions and comments you can think of. Just ask me in the bottom bar. Thanks.